Well, a world touring classical pianist who played her first recital at the age of 6 is bringing her extensive discography, including a repertoire from Mozart to Beethoven, to the First Coast. Here to tell us about her performance tonight at Friday Musicale is Katie Mahan. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, you were in town for a lecture last night
Mhm.
ahead of tonight's performance. Will you tell us a little bit about what your subject was?
So my subject was Mozart, because I actually live in Salzburg, and Mozart is one of the great passions of my life. And I had the wonderful opportunity during COVID and shortly after to do a project with Colorado Public Radio in which I basically took my viewers on all of the places in Salzburg where Mozart was associated with. So the places where he lived, where he had friends, where works were premiered, and it was an absolutely fascinating project. And so from that, I have now a regular lecture, which I've been invited to give at many places in Europe, in the U.S., and it's a lot of fun to talk about Mozart the man.
Yeah. And so you're able to kind of bring people on that journey, show them sort of through the places that he lived and worked and stayed, a little bit about who he was as a person. He's a fascinating subject.
Exactly, and I think in a lot of the biographies, there's a focus on Mozart in Vienna, but Mozart didn't come from Vienna. He came from Salzburg, and I think it's important for every one of us to realize that the place where we are born certainly shapes us, and Salzburg shaped Mozart, his personality, his desires, and his whole, as a person. And so that's what I wanted to focus on in this series.
Tell us a little bit about Salzburg. I mean, how is it that that town, what is the town, um, in what ways does it influence him? In what ways does it influence people like you who live there?
Well, I think in Mozart's day, it was a very extremely religious, very wealthy place. And, Mozart's family was very devout. And Mozart grew up with a very strong sense that his talent was God given. And in a way, he believed, his father believed, his mother also believed, that his goal in life, his whole purpose in life would be to realize those God-given talents, and also another thing that's very interesting about Salzburg is they've had always a very special sense of humor,
Hmm.
and this kind of earthy sense of humor is something that we read in Mozart's letters, this toilet humor and
Earthy,
this
I like
whole
that.
ideas of jokes and games, he was a product of the Salzburg mentality.
That's fun.
Mhm.
So you also were a very young performer. Do you learn anything in studying about his life and his childhood, his emergence into the musical scene, just in your own upbringing and in your own career?
Well, I mean, I can't compare myself to Mozart, he was one of the greatest geniuses
I,
to ever live,
I'm not
but
asking you to make that
yeah.
jump necessarily, but just in terms of being a child prodigy, which you
Yeah, I
were.
mean, of course, you have to, if you have a talent as a child that you want to build for a career, then your childhood is different than other people because you are focused on your art. I mean, when I was in kindergarten, I went to morning kindergarten. My mom picked me up. We had lunch, and I practiced literally the rest of the day. So already at the age of 5 and 6, I was practicing 5 to 6 hours a day. And so that was my life. It was school and piano.
Yeah. Well, we do have a clip, a video and audio clip. It is your interpretation of Piano Sonata 14 by Beethoven,
Mhm,
later named Moonlight Sonata, and it is on your new record, Heaven and Hell.
mhm.
Let's take a listen. It's just lovely. I mean, it's such a familiar tune, but you play with such emotion and, such kind of depth of feeling. How do you learn a piece like that? And how do you learn to play it in a way that it is personally expressive, in addition to being sort of a song, a melody that we're all familiar with?
Well, in the case of that particular piece, I've also taught piano since I was 13, and I've taught it to so many students. And it was actually a piece I didn't really have any desire to learn until
Because you'd heard it so much, or.
yeah, and because so many young people play it, and but then I learned the story that this piece is actually related to Mozart, and there's a very interesting story behind it. It has absolutely no relation to Moonlight, but rather it is related to Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. And Beethoven was very influenced by Mozart. And when he wrote this movement, Beethoven makes a very unusual remark at the beginning that the entire first movement, this famous piece, should be played with the pedal down from beginning to end. And, this is not typical for the classical period, but Beethoven writes very clearly senza sordino. And so that means that from beginning till end, there should be a complete blur of harmonies. And when I discovered the story with the connection to Mozart's dramatic opera Don Giovanni, I thought, okay, maybe this is the connection, because in this first movement, Beethoven is looking back on to Mozart and back to the whole story of Don Giovanni as if in a dream. And dreams are blurred, harmonies are blurred, and so it makes sense. And so the piece really came alive for me.
Oh, it's fascinating. I'm sorry to have not heard your lecture last night because I know there's such a rich history to share. But for people who want to hear your music, it is being performed tonight. The performance is from Vienna to New York, and we should say it includes all the way up to George Gershwin. So a really broad range of music. And we've got a link on our website. Katie Mahan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
having me.